Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, Managing Director here at CinemaBlend, and you have come from Avengers Endgame and you have huge questions about time travel.
The only thing that does make sense is that nothing makes sense.
And you're not alone. We're all sort of figuring out how the rules of time travel work in this most recent MCU movie, so we figured we would break down what we think is happening in Avengers Endgame when it comes to time travel.
Why are we doing this again?
Because we're nice.
Make sure you've seen the movie before you get into this. Obviously, we're going to dive into huge spoilers from the film. If you haven't seen it yet, go see it, grab your tickets, come back, we'll talk about time travel and all the crazy ways that it affects the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward. One of the most important scenes in understanding how time travel is going to work in Avengers Endgame belongs to Hulk, where he's trying to explain how the rules that we assume with time travel based on movies like Back to the Future don't really work. And in Back to the Future, you could jump into the past and make a change that will affect the future.
I understood that reference.
But Hulk is essentially saying that time travel doesn't work that way, and instead explains it this way. I want you to imagine a line. Time is a line, and it's constantly moving forward. I'm going to use dates to sort of illustrate this point. What Hulk is saying is that if someone from 2019 jumps back to 2014, then the events of 2019 are now that person's past, because they are constantly moving forward from 2014. So Hulk says your future is now your past. And I know that that sounds confusing when he says it, and it's even confusing on paper. But if you think about the fact that you cannot jump backwards to affect yourself because you're always moving forward, then the minute that you jump from 2019 to 2014, 2019 becomes your past. It's behind you, and you can't do anything anymore to change what has happened because it's already happened. The only thing you can affect is what's coming forward in front of you, and that's a really important point that you need to remember as we continue to discuss everything that happens as a ramification of this. Now I want to talk about how those rules apply to three very important characters in the movie, because the way that time travel works affects their plot lines specifically. The first one is Loki.
He's adopted.
The team jumps to 2012, and they enter into the events of the Battle of New York. Now, they cannot interact with each other because that will disrupt the timeline, and that gets to something the Ancient One tells Bruce Banner later on, and we'll touch on that point in a minute. But once Loki disappears from that moment in 2012, everything that came after 2012 with Loki doesn't happen.
Piss off, Ghost!
It's not that they've made a change that affects the future, it's just that it's setting up different events that take place on that timeline. Part of the reason why I believe that this is how it's playing out is because Loki is getting his own television series on the Disney Plus streaming service, and I guarantee you it's going to pick up from the part that he escapes the Avengers in 2012 with the Tesseract in his hands.
I don't think we should be focusing on Loki. That guy's brain is a bag full of cats.
This logic also affects Gamora and Nebula, and it's going to take some explanation. Nebula and Rhodey from 2019 jump back to 2014, which is the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy. They pluck Gamora out of 2014, and when they jump back into the action of the battle at Avengers headquarters, it's now 2024.
Is that better?
It's worse. It's so much worse.
I want to clarify one thing specifically about Nebula, because a lot of people are asking, like, hey, one Nebula killed the other Nebula, so why didn't she just fade away? But when you ask that, you're basically still following Back to the Future rules, in that if you eliminate something from the past, the present version of you doesn't exist. It's really confusing, I get it, but let's do the dates again, because I think that helps me keep it in order. We have 2024 Nebula, who 5 years after the snap travels with Rhodey back to 2014. And in 2014 now you have two different versions of Nebula. You have the 2024 version of her, and you have the 2014 version of her, who's still following Thanos and does not believe that there could ever be a reconciliation between Nebula and Gamora.
Help us fight Ronan! You know he's crazy!
I know you're both crazy.
2024 Nebula kills 2014 version of her, eliminating the double Nebula that's on that point in the timeline, and instead of both of them moving forward from that point, just the one moves forward, and she wouldn't fade away. She still exists. She just jumped to that point in 2024. And she's joined by Gamora from 2014, and Gamora from 2014 moves forward. She'll be confused because it's not her timeline, or it's not her place in the timeline. She essentially missed 10 years of her life, but I think that'll get addressed in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Who the hell are you guys?
The second scene that matters when you're thinking about time travel in Avengers Endgame happens with the Ancient One, where she's talking to Bruce Banner. So up to this point, Bruce believes that if they go back in time, they can get the stones before Thanos does, thereby creating a timeline moving forward where Thanos cannot get the stones because the Avengers have gotten them. However, the Ancient One does explain to Bruce that the power of the Infinity Stones is such so that if you remove one of them from the existing timeline, it's not going to create a butterfly effect, but what it's going to create is a dark timeline that will run parallel to the one that the heroes are riding on, but it'll be drastically different. Bruce understands that, so his solution is to use time travel to, once they're done using the Reality Stone to bring back all of the Dusted in 2024, he will bring them back, or someone will bring them back to all of the places where the Avengers took them from. The minute you return the stones to the moment where you took them from, those timelines will go away, and they'll all just merge back into the main timeline, and the main timeline can continue on. In a way, it kind of contradicts the rules that the film has established, but again, it's magic, and it's sorcery, and it's Infinity Stones, and this is a franchise with a talking raccoon.
Don't call me a raccoon! I'm sorry. I meant trash panda.
So we can ask questions as much as we want up to a certain point, but you also have to have a sort of suspension of disbelief of if the Ancient One is telling Bruce that, look, the Infinity Stones, you can borrow them for now, but you got to bring them back to where you took them from, I'm okay, I can ride forward with that. And it also sets up, I think, in the MCU that later on, if the Infinity Stones, one or two of them is removed from the place where they were at that point in the timeline, then this could be the way that the MCU brings in the multiverse. Even kind of understanding time travel to this extent does not answer every single question that I have about Avengers Endgame, so let's run through some major questions that I have, even accepting everything that I've sort of laid out as a general premise. If Steve brings back the Soul Stone, does he encounter Red Skull? Like, that's his arch nemesis who he has not seen since Captain America the First Avenger.
You don't give up, do you?
So does Cap finally encounter Red Skull after all of these years? And if he's able to return the Soul Stone, and he has to return it, they have to return all of the stones to the place where they were in order for the alternate timeline to not be created. When you return the Soul Stone, does that mean that Black Widow is able to come back that way? Like, Black Widow sacrificed herself so that Hawkeye could get the Soul Stone. Cap could return it. Now, no one up to this point has ever tried to return it, so I don't know the rules that are happening with regards to that, but it means we know that the Black Widow movie is coming, that Scarlett Johansson has signed on to do it. We were assuming it's a prequel, and I assume it even more so since Natasha sacrificed herself in this movie. But what if that movie begins with Chris Evans as Captain America returning the Soul Stone and it bringing Black Widow back? Now that would be, you know, it would feel like a little bit of a cheat because we just watched her sacrifice herself for the good of the team. But I really need to know, like, what happens when the Soul Stone gets returned. And same thing with the Ether, which they plucked from Natalie Portman in Asgard. Like, how does Cap get back to Asgard? It struck me as strange that when Cap time traveled at the end of Endgame to go return all of the stones, that he took Thor's hammer with him. I didn't really know why he was doing that.
Whosoever be he, worthy shall have the power.
Let's try to wrap this up. The big takeaway is that I think everything that happened in the MCU still happened. I don't believe that the time jumps and changing things in the past to affect things in the future eliminated everything that we watched in the 21 movies up till this point. Everyone still has memories of the adventures that they went on, and there's definitely lines of dialogue in there where Hulk, before he does his snap, makes it very clear that they're not trying to doctor everything, they just want to bring back everybody who had been dusted. So we'll be really fascinated to see how, when Far From Home picks up, how Spider-Man's dealing with the repercussions of the fact that he was one of the dusted and now he's back in a world where everybody's basically back. But I don't think it eliminates everything that happened in the MCU up to this point. What do you guys think?
He really grows on you, doesn't he?
Do you think that I'm onto something here, or am I completely way off base? I want to hear your theories about how time travel works in Endgame. Maybe you guys picked up some other things from the film that I missed out on, or do you actually think that events that took place in Endgame did drastically change how things are going forward in the MCU? Head down into the comments section and start weighing in into how time travel affects not just this movie, but all of the Marvel stories that could come. And while you're down there in the comments section, do me a favor, you know the drill. Hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and every time that we post a new video like this on CinemaBlend's YouTube page, you will be alerted to it right away.